Dedicated that children's sermon to two of our favorite Sunday school teachers. Had Mike Toomer, who all three of my children had in nursery school here at Emmanuel. In honor of them, Clarence and Nolan Getton. For years, they taught the little ones and their abiding love. And when Bonnie and I were doing the Sunday school superintendent stint, I had just started to learn how to play the guitar, just to entertain the little ones. That was about the level of my guitar playing. And the first time I did it, one of the little ones snuck up behind me and started to turn the keys on me. And I was new enough that it wasn't very easy for me to get back to the tune. But every time we sang that song with the little ones, Nola had a basket of pennies that made a lot more noise on the linoleum floor of the nursery. So it was a good way to start. I was asked to preach this morning because I represent four generations at Emmanuel. And it starts with the fact that I was confirmed at this altar. I was married at this altar. Our three children were baptized and confirmed at this altar. By way of identity, I'm the son-in-law of Oma, or Marguerite Williams, who's hiding behind that stanchion back there. And my wife is Bonnie Hanson. Ray Williams was also a member of this congregation, Marguerite's husband and Bonnie's dad, as was my mom, Edna Hanson, some of you may remember. My three siblings, George, Gladys, and Dick, were also confirmed at Emmanuel, as were Bonnie's two sisters, Cindy and Beth. I'm known as Pop to Heather, Abby, and David, who were baptized and confirmed here. Lachlan and Crawford Gray, Dagny Harper, Auden and Bryn all call me Papa. At least the first four do, who can talk. And Brian Gray and Dana Robinson are my son-in-laws. Over time, I served as Emmanuel's groundkeeper as a teenager, mowing the lawn. Also did several years as Sunday school superintendent. I served on council 4 times and twice to those who were as the council president. But this is not about me or the 4 generations. It's about the generations of this congregation and of the magic pennies of love that we have spread, each in our own way, to others around us. Let's start with the pastors. We're all aware of Pastor Paul's ability to comfort us in times of sadness and illness. Certainly, maybe too much in the last couple of years in this congregation. But there's an area that not many of you probably know unless you've had teenagers, and those teenagers have attended Pinecrest Camp and such. I recall when Heather went to Pinecrest, my oldest went to Pinecrest for her first summer camp. We had the dubious distinction of being the only parents of the 4 or 5 teenagers from Emmanuel that attended to own a caravan, so guess who drove? And I went down to pick them up, I think it was a Sunday, and they were all excited, and they obviously had a good time, all excited, and a little red-eyed from not getting enough sleep. We weren't in the caravan more than 5 minutes on the way home, and a James Taylor song came on the radio, and to my wonder and surprise, the teenagers started to hug one another and sing in unison along with the James Taylor song, one of the songs about love. And about 30 seconds after they finished the song, they were all asleep. And I had them on the ride home without anybody to talk to. But I reflected on that. It was just beyond me, the wonder of these teenagers, the bond that they had formed with one another, the bond of fellowship, the bond of love. It was absolutely amazing. And with Pastor Paul's involvement in Pinecrest, I have to believe there are dozens, if not hundreds, of fathers who have driven home and had maybe the same experience. He passes the pennies on not only in this congregation but beyond into the youth. Then there was Pastor John Henry's peaceful demeanor. At every meeting he and I had together, we began it and ended it with a prayer asking for God's guidance for what we did. I never knew him to raise his voice to anyone in the congregation or anyone, regardless of who they were. And he truly loved every one of us at Emmanuel. His magic pennies to us was his peace and spirit and love for us. More recently, I recall Pastor Jack ministering to both my older brother George, who just retired from the ministry, and to son David, who's even at this moment is preaching out in Rochester, Minnesota, as a seminarian intern. George was retiring from the ministry, his ministry in Wyckoff, New Jersey, and was relocating to North Carolina while David was preparing to enter the ministry. Pastor Jack made George laugh in this time of trial and stress and reflection. George told me one time they'd had lunch and they were outside the IHOP in the parking lot. And as they walked to the car, Pastor Jack started to sing, "Jesus Loves Me." And before they got to the car, the two of them were singing "Jesus Loves Me" at the top of their lungs, and George just laughed. Jack had that way about him. With regards to David, every time Pastor Jack and Mikey passed through parts of Minnesota where David is at, they make it a point to stop and have supper with him and stay in contact. So in addition to Pastor Paul's mentoring David, so has Pastor Jack. The furthest back in my memory goes to John R. Pearson, or JRP. And my lasting image of him was a moment when Abigail was still an infant, probably about 2 years old, and she had to go for exploratory surgery at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Barney stayed with Abigail overnight, and in the morning I got up and got Heather babysat and headed down to the hospital to be with them before surgery, and I guess I arrived 5:30 to 6 a.m. Surgery, I think it was for 6:30 or 7. I get to the room, and who's sitting in the room praying with Barney? He beat me. And I think he shared a lot of magic pennies with a lot of people. Before I go on talking about the congregation in general, we should also talk about the sons of the congregation who have gone into the ministry. The ones I recall are James Tishner, my brother George, Bill Eshen, Kent Lee, and now David. As I said, he's preaching now out in Rochester, Minnesota. His advice to me about preaching this sermon, since he's a veteran now, keep it under 9 minutes. I call that number of sons of the congregation going on into the ministry quite a tradition across the generations. And we shouldn't forget the deacons of Emmanuel and all that they have served both here and beyond the congregation. But the family of Emmanuel is not defined by our pastors, or the deacons, or the sons of the congregation that go on into the ministry. Think of our music programs and how they help us spread the things of love. We Emmanuelites take it for granted a lot of times just how special our congregation's celebration of Sunday and of holidays is, until we see the impact on others. This includes the music program includes the congregation, the choir directors, the organists, the directors of the different choirs, and the musicians that we had. And I recall, Heather, you made it. Time for your story. When Heather was in college, she brought home a couple of her friends for Christmas. And they came to Emmanuel for the Christmas Eve service, and they celebrated Christmas with us that year. And they left in awe. So much so that they kept coming back every Christmas. And to this day, every time we see them, they're now grown, married, with kids as well. When we run into them, they still remark to me, "You still do Christmas that way?" It's a spreading of it. Also, in preparing this message, Bonnie and I tried to sit down one night and figure out just how many consecutive years we had someone in the bell choirs. Started with Heather. I think Heather was in like the first bell choir. Close to it? No? It was pretty close to it. And on through David. We lost track. And I think of all the pennies that the bell choir has left around the world. In their concerts, and both here in the region and in other countries. And the pennies they spread as ringers continue. Heather is now involved in a program called Education Through Music, which brings music back into city schools that need it, to help promote education and retain the students. Abigail, as you probably know, now directs the bell choirs of Mount Kisco and has led the Hudson Valley Festival and has founded the Junior Bell Choir Festival. When I was out to see David, I happened to mention at dinner with the pastor there that he was in bell choirs, and now he's a proud member of their adult bell ringers and the model ringer, because their conductor says, "Do it the way David does." Brian and Oma also played in the bell choir. Somehow it missed Bonnie and my generation. And now the tradition continues. Lachlan can not only sing, but he can play bells. How many people have they touched over the years? I also have a memory of music on a very personal level. Years ago, my mom, Edna, and I, and Abigail went to one of George's, Brother George's installations in Syracuse. And it was late in the night, and we got back on the thruway, and we're headed home, and very dark outside. And out of nowhere, Mom started to sing some of the old hymns that she knew. And if any of you know Abigail, you know very well it wasn't very long before she was singing right along with Grandma. 10 years ago, when we put Mom to rest, George's son Gary, as we were ready to progress up to the grave, announced, "What are we going to sing? Grandma would want us singing." And we broke into song as we march up to the grave for the sermon. Grandma would want us singing. Let's not leave out the Sunday school. As I told you, that the Dentons hold a special place in my heart and the countless lives they touched. We've always been blessed with members willing and able to teach our children, to give them the foundation of the faith, whether it's through the regular Sunday school, through the nursery school, or through Vacation Bible School. And as the new this year's new faculty is installed, we should all dedicate ourselves to support them in every way we can. Reinforce the lessons that they learn and support the teachers. And the building of annual, my last segment here. I recall the dedication of this building. I sat there in the back pew with Mom. My brother George was up here as acolyte. I think the pastor at the time was Pastor Boris. The sanctuary was a lot smaller then. I think the start of the sanctuary was right about this beam because the offices were here. We didn't have an education. We had to go upstairs into the church office, stuff behind the altar. We didn't have a rare. And I said to myself, I sat back there, I'm sure, this is huge. Because we come from the small wood building on Lincoln Avenue. And I could, probably never imagine that we need more space. And now we have it. So we've expanded. I came home on leave one time, and lo and behold, while I was gone in service, it was the education wing. I also remember a time on a Thanksgiving. At the closing prayer, I was asked to stand up in the third pew and right where you're sitting. And during the closing prayer in my Air Force uniform, pray for peace. Now this was the late 60s, folks. Praying for peace in church was not a popular item. The war in Vietnam was going on, and a lot of tension in the public. But in a lot of ways, the church tried to stay out of it. And to have someone in uniform pray for peace. I remember that day because as I stood out outside, very few men came up and talked to me. But you know what? When my Christmas care package came to the church, which I'm sure the women package, it was the biggest ever. Our building is not just brick and mortar. We have opened our doors from the very first day to the community. For community groups like AA and Scouts, and who knows how many else. It's a tradition for generations. We need to keep passing that on. As I close, I think back to the song Magic Penny. The reason that song speaks about the lowest denomination of our currency. It's not the big things we do that help us to pass on the love. It's not our big donations or our big acts of kindness. It's each and every day doing the little things. The way that we treat others. The way we would want to be treated. And those are the magic pennies that we can pass on. Whether we're pastors, whether we're mothers, whether we're fathers, whether we're pop-ups, whatever it is, in all of our life. A tradition of Emmanuel that has been spreading the magic pennies of love in the way we live. Thank you for today's opportunity.